The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 22nd chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Once more Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding banquet, but they would not come. Again he sent other slaves, saying, 'Tell those who have been invited, look, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they made light of it and went away, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his slaves, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his slaves, 'The wedding is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet.' Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered all whom they found, both good and bad, so the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in and saw the guest, he noticed a man there who was not wearing a wedding robe. And he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe?' And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot, and throw him into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.'" This is the gospel of our Lord.
Praise you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Whew. Back-to-back weeks with tough gospels, huh? Well, when I was in seminary, we had a Lutheran professor who would say the most outrageous things, right? He was funny, he was sarcastic, he was sometimes offensive, and he was always challenging. You just never knew what to expect or what he might say next. And after a particularly outrageous comment, he would look at us and say this comment. He would say, "You know, I am given to hyperbole. And if you quote me outside of class, I'll call you a liar." See, that was his way of telling us not to take what he said literally, but to take it seriously. That was his way of getting us to look beyond the text and see the deeper truth. That was his way of challenging our preconceived ideas and expectations so that we might see something new, hear something new, think something new, and ultimately become something new. So I wonder if that's what Jesus is doing today in this gospel. I wonder if he could have attached the same caveat to his parable as did my professor to all his outrageous comments. Here's what I mean. Have you ever received an invitation to an event that you really did not want to attend? What did you do about that? I'll bet you did not mistreat, abuse, and murder your mailman. Because that's what happens in this parable. Maybe Jesus is giving it hyperbole. Have you ever invited people to your party who did not attend? You cleaned, you cooked, you decorated. The table was set. You may have lit some candles, put on a little music, maybe some soft jazz, right? Everything was ready, but some of the guests did not come. So the question is, did that make you so angry that you killed them and burned down their houses? Probably not, right? I hope. But that's what happens in this parable. See, this parable of the king's son's wedding is so outrageous, so shocking, that it begs to be taken seriously and not literally. It begs to be taken as truth, but not as historical fact. Besides, to hear this parable and conclude that God is an angry king who, if he doesn't get his way, destroys his own people and burns their cities, simply does not fit with the God revealed by Jesus Christ in the four Gospels. If we tell that story as the gospel truth, I think Jesus might call us all liars. But don't get mistaken. This is a parable about judgment. But it might not be the judgment we think it is. Speaking about the first group of guests, the king says, those invited were not worthy. So by implication, those in the second invited group were worthy, right? See, we tend to get nervous and fearful when God begins making judgments. It leaves us wondering whether we are in the first group or maybe we're in the second group. Are we unworthy or are we worthy? I suspect our nervousness and fear about God's judgments arise from the assumption that God judges us in the same way we so often judge others. See, more often than not, our own judgments of others are judgments of exclusion. What if it's just the opposite with God? What if Jesus is trying to shock us into seeing that the kingdom of heaven is not business as usual according to our own standards? What if God's judgment on our lives is one of grace, acceptance, and invitation, a judgment of inclusion? If that's true, then what separates or distinguishes the first invited guests from the second? The difference isn't that one was more deserving than the other. See, the first invited guests were the recipients of the king's invitation and favor. But so were the second guests, right? And so was the man who showed up without a wedding robe. They were all invited. They were all favored. None of them had done anything to earn or deserve that invitation. It was just given to them. And if that's true for them, it's also true for us. The difference isn't that the king likes one group more than the other group. His sole motivation is to share his banquet. He wants someone, anyone, everyone to join in his joy and celebration and be part of his kingdom and life. Both groups were given the same opportunity. If that's true for them, it is also true for us. The difference is not that some guests are good and the other ones are just downright bad. Because there's no distinction or judgment made based on behavior, beliefs, attitudes, or morals. To the contrary, with the second round of invitations, the king sends his servant into the main streets with the instruction to invite everyone that you find. And they did. They went out into the streets and gathered all whom they found, both good and bad. And if that's true for them, it's true for us too. That's probably not the kind of social life most of us live, though, now is it? Offer to another or receive from another. But the parable is talking about God's kingdom, not ours. So what is it? What's the difference between those who were not worthy and those that were? See, there's only one thing that I found that distinguishes the first invited guest from the second invited guest. Can you guess what that is? Presence. The second invited guest showed up. The first invited guest did not. The wedding hall was filled with the second invited guest because the first invited guest just would not come. And that's the only difference between those two groups. See, we learned something from this church. The key to our life in God is to just show up. To be present. And I admit that's a lot easier said than done now, isn't it? To be present is difficult work. Think how difficult it is to be present to another person. It means establishing the other person as our priority. It means seeing them for who they are and not who we want them to be or think that they should be. It means opening ourselves to receive their life into our own. It means the vulnerability of entrusting and giving our life to the other. It means really listening to what they say and not just what we want to hear or what we hear. It means letting go of our own agendas, distractions, our fears, and our prejudices. It means bringing and offering all that we are and all that we have. So if we're not doing that with others, we're probably not doing that with God either. Because instead we too often go our separate ways to our own beliefs, our own ideologies, and our own businesses. We hold on to hate and we leave no room for the Spirit. Or we're just too busy, too tired, or too distracted. You heard that expression, there's work to be done and money to be made, right? People say that because we make light of the other's life and what's being really offered. We fall into the traps of criticizing others for the way they look, the way they think, or the way they act. If we don't earn it or work for it, we assume it has no value whatsoever. After all, you get what you pay for, right? See, we're convinced we have better things to do and better places to be. And guess what? That's what that first invited group did. What they did not realize, and what we sometimes don't realize, is that there is no life outside the banquet, the kingdom. To show up and be present is to be worthy before God. It's that simple and it's that difficult. We show up for our neighbors who are hungry, tired, or persecuted. We show up when we advocate for justice and stand against hatred. We don't earn or prove our worthiness as a prerequisite to enter the banquet. We show up, we be present, and discover for ourselves the worthiness God has always known about us. And that's when our lives will begin to change. And you might ask yourselves, but what about that guy who showed up with without the wedding robe on? See, this is more than just a dress code violation. Something else was missing, church. He was speechless. It was as if he wasn't really there. Jesus is reminding us that there are times when we show up, but we are just not really present. Our body is there, but we've left the room. We claim to follow Christ, but our actions show us something completely different. So here's what I wonder. What if this man had said something? Anything? What if he had just made his presence known not so much to the king, but to himself? What if he had said, I was hungry, I smelled the food, I trusted you'd feed me? Or what if he said, I was lonely, I saw the lights on, I trusted you to take me in? Or what if he said, I was thirsty, I knew there would be wine there, I trusted you would give me a drink? Or what if he said, I was naked, I knew people would be well dressed, I trusted you would clothe me? What if he was sad and grieving? He heard the music and laughter, and he trusted us to share that joy. What if he was empty, and he saw the abundance, and he trusted us to fill him? What if he was dying? He saw the door was open, and he trusted us to give him life. What if he had said any one of those or 1,000 other things like them, church? It would have been enough, don't you think? He would have shown up with all that he was and all that he had. He would have been present. Then the king would have said to him, "Oh, my dear friend, I am so glad you got my invitation. I'm so glad that you're here. You are worthy." See, each one of us has been invited to be the love in this world. We have been chosen to extend the invitation so that everyone is included in the love that we call God. This, dear sisters and brothers, is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if that is true for him, then it is true for us. Amen.